is the Insta360 Ultra, and it's probably one of the most hyped cameras of the year. And I got it just in time to bring it to the Dolomites, put it through its paces and find out if it's really worthy of all the hype. So let's quickly talk about the design and handling, because let's face it, if you've ever used one of DJI's pocket cameras, then you're going to feel right at home with the Luna Ultra. It borrows heavily from that same formula with a rotating 2-inch screen and a very similar overall design. It is a little bit larger than the Pocket 4, but in my opinion, it is still small and light enough to make a fantastic travel camera. It's going to fit very easily into any camera bag or small backpack. Honestly, I think this is just about the perfect form factor for a vlogging camera. It's comfortable to hold, it's intuitive to use, and just completely fuss-free to pack for a trip. I also really like the new protective case. It does a really good job of protecting the gimbal and the lens while still being pretty quick to remove when you do want to grab it and just start shooting. And speaking of lenses, the Luna Ultra features 2 sensors and 2 lenses. So a wide angle lens that's roughly equivalent to 20mm on full frame, and a 3x telephoto lens at around 60mm, and combined with a digital zoom, that gives you a maximum reach of around 240mm. One of the biggest differences though compared to the Pocket series is the detachable 2-inch OLED screen. Not only can it remotely control the camera and the gimbal, but it also doubles as a wireless microphone, giving you up to 20 meters of wireless control and audio. Overall, the Luna Ultra feels very well built, and in my experience so far, it's surprisingly reliable. In fact, I've probably had fewer issues with it than I have with some of the Pocket cameras that I've been using for years. So yeah, design and handling are both excellent, but what about the thing that really matters? Image quality. I think the Luna Ultra delivers an excellent image for such a small, compact and convenient camera. Everything you're seeing here was shot in iLog. This is Insta360's own log profile, and I've been really impressed with the color and contrast coming out of this camera. And what I particularly like compared to the Pocket 4, for example, is that the footage doesn't have that overly sharpened kind of action camera look. And you can shoot all the way up to 8K with the Luna, but honestly, when comparing it side by side with the regular 4K, I could barely see any difference between the 2 resolutions. So for me, the larger file sizes of 8K just wasn't really worth it. So I ended up shooting pretty much everything in 4K on this trip. But still, the footage is plenty sharp, but I think in a bit more of a natural and organic way compared to most action cameras and what they're going to give you. And I'm still getting to grips with iLog, but the colors feel accurate and kind of restrained rather than overly saturated like a lot of action cameras. And I think it produces a really pleasing look for both landscapes, general scenes, and skin tones for when you're videoing people. There are also built-in Leica color profiles, but personally I always prefer shooting in log myself rather than baking in a look. But if you don't want to spend any time color grading, I can see these kind of built-in looks being very popular. And one thing I have noticed though is a slight magenta tint in some clips, and I also found that Insta360's own downloadable conversion LUTs do tend to produce better color and exposure compared to using DaVinci Resolve's color space transform tool. But to get this level of image quality in a camera that's this small whilst also benefiting from a built-in gimbal makes it a fantastic option for travel and just everyday content creation. The zoom range also is another big advantage with the Luna, because it allows you to use more flattering focal lengths when you're filming people and create footage that looks very different from the kind of typical flat, wide-angle action camera aesthetic. You can go from really wide establishing shots at 20mm straight through to tighter detail shots at 60mm without needing another camera or another attachable lens, for example. And zooming in to say 60mm also gives you noticeably more background separation than you'd normally kind of expect from a small compact camera like this. And I think that really helps give footage a little bit more of a polished and cinematic look from a small camera like this. And if you do prefer shooting vertically, the portrait mode image quality is surprisingly good too. Even though it's limited to 3K, the footage still holds up pretty well. But I have heard that in a new firmware, you can kind of turn the camera on its side and get full vertical 4K, but I couldn't do that at the time of making this video. So here's an example of the huge zoom range of the Luna. And it's just great for capturing subjects off in the distance, and the footage, even at 12 times zoom, I think is very usable. I noticed very little drop off in image quality using the 6 times zoom, and only really noticed the slightest bit of softness creeping in at 12 times. So for a camera that's this small, I was genuinely impressed by how well it holds up as you zoom in. Zooming in is also really easy thanks to this dedicated zoom rocker here. And it just basically lets you quickly move between the focal lengths or the zoom points without taking your attention away from the shots. You can also gradually zoom, but it just means that you're not constantly forced into that ultra wide action camera perspective, and you can really vary your compositions and change things up, use more flattering focal lengths for people, and create footage that feels a little bit more intentional and cinematic. And I found that at the wide end, even without using the optional ultra wide lens attachment, which I don't have yet, I think the standard lens at 20mm strikes a really nice balance. It's wide enough to vlog comfortably, in my opinion, while still being great for landscapes, travel footage, and those wider establishing shots. I've also been pretty impressed with the dynamic range when shooting in iLog. Most of these clips were shot in auto exposure mode, letting the camera just handle the exposure for itself, and for the most part, it did an excellent job. It protects highlight very well, and even in really high contrast scenes, there's still plenty of detail retained in the shadows. And the files also hold up nicely when grading and pushing and pulling things around. You have a good amount of flexibility in post with these files. And there were several occasions where I was pretty convinced that the highlights were going to be blown out, only to recover far more detail than I expected later on in the grade. Again, this is some of the best dynamic range that I've seen from a camera in this category. So let's compare the Luna Ultra to both the DJI Pocket 4 and the Canon R8. And this is a tough scene for a little camera like this because we're shooting into really strong backlight with a subject that's in a little bit of darkness, and there's just a huge amount of contrast here. But the Luna does a surprisingly good job. Compared to the Pocket 4, I think there's noticeably less noise in the shadows, and it just retains more detail in our subject as well. Side by side, you can also see the really big differences in color between the two cameras, where the Luna tends to lean a little bit more magenta, whilst the Pocket has a pretty strong green look. And as you'd expect, the Canon R8 still comes out way on top. It's going to offer way more dynamic range, significantly more background separation, and an overall depth and kind of thickness to the image that a smaller sensor camera like this simply can't replicate. So if anyone's telling you this is going to replace your full frame camera in terms of outright image quality, then it's definitely not going to do that. So like I said at the start of the video, the overall design of the Luna Ultra combined with that 20mm lens makes it a fantastic vlogging camera. But if you're going to be buying a camera like this for vlogging, then audio matters just as much or maybe even more than video quality. So how do the built-in microphones sound? So right now I'm in the middle of a pretty busy square in Trento in Italy, and I'm pretty interested to hear how the internal mics sound because I don't have the Insta360 mics. So for the entirety of this trip, I'm going to be relying on the internal mics, and I've heard pretty good things about them so far. All right, I'm going to test the internal mics again, but this time put it up against my lav setup. And this lav setup probably costs about as much as the Luna itself does. So I'm interested to see if there is a big difference. And I'm going to swap between the internal mics and the lav as I tell you about today's sponsor, who is Squarespace. As a photographer, I think you need a website, and it just doesn't get any easier than Squarespace. There's no design skills needed or any coding skills. It's all pretty much just drag and drop, and they even have amazing tools like Blueprint AI and now Design Intelligence that can all help you set up a website really quickly and really easily. And also, I think that Squarespace's fully customizable galleries are just the best that you can get for showing off your work to potential clients. Squarespace also have amazing e-commerce tools that's just so easy to get set up and start selling fast, and you can accept all kinds of different payment types seamlessly thanks to Squarespace payments. So if you're ready to get started, head on over to squarespace.com/JamesReader, and you can sign up there for a free 14-day trial, or use the code JamesReader to get 10% off your first domain or website. So I've had a chance to listen back to the microphones, the built-in mic, on the Luna Ultra, and I am beyond impressed. It sounds so good. I've been using the Canon PowerShot V1. I've always thought the mic on that sounds great, and this sounds very similar, if not even better. It somehow just manages to really isolate your voice, and it barely needs any work in post. So for a convenient travel camera like this, for vlogging, the mics are just outstanding on this thing. The Luna Ultra also offers slow-mo recording at both 50p and 120p in 4K. And I have to say, I was genuinely surprised by how usable the footage is. On cameras like this, slow motion modes are often a bit of an afterthought, with a pretty noticeable drop in image quality and detail compared to the standard frame rates, but that just doesn't really seem to be the case with the Luna Ultra. The 120p footage still retains a good amount of detail and sharpness, and more importantly, it looks consistent with the rest of the camera's video modes. It's not perfect, but it's definitely good enough that I'd actually use it rather than avoiding it altogether. Low light performance from the Luna Ultra is also pretty impressive. If you're shooting in iLog though, using just a standard video mode, things do get pretty noisy once you get to around 6400 ISO. However, if you switch over to pure video mode, which is specifically designed for low light shooting, well then the results are surprisingly good. You do seem to lose a little bit of detail due to extra noise reduction, I'm guessing, but in return, you get a very, very clean image, even in super dark conditions. One thing I would recommend though with this camera is avoiding auto exposure when you are shooting in a dark situation, because in my testing, auto ISO seemed to produce a noticeably kind of softer, mushier image compared to switching into manual exposure and setting the ISO manually yourself. That consistently gives me better results. So yeah, when you're using this in low light, I highly recommend doing that. Comparing it to the DJI Pocket 4 though, again in the Pocket's own dedicated low light mode, the Luna produces an image that's not only cleaner, but sharper too. Now it does look slightly more digitally sharpened than the DJI, but I actually prefer the color rendering from the Luna in these conditions too. I just think looking at the comparison, my skin tones appear a little bit pink and washed out on the Pocket 4, whereas the Luna delivers a richer image with more natural looking, true to life colors. Taking a quick look at stabilization, I found that the built-in 3-axis gimbal on the Luna Ultra does a great job of producing smooth, floaty footage when you're walking or even running. Even when you're at the 3x or 6x zoom, the footage retains that stable look, and it just does such an impressive job of removing the obvious bounce or footsteps that you'd normally expect when you're moving in a shot like this. But more importantly, I think that the stabilization never feels robotic or overcorrected. It still retains a pretty natural kind of handheld feel, which helps the footage look a little bit more cinematic and less artificially stabilized, like a lot of digital stabilization does to your footage. And if we put the Luna Ultra up against the DJI Pocket 4, I would actually probably give a slight edge to the DJI when it just comes to outright stabilization. It just feels a touch smoother and a bit more floaty, but honestly, there's not too much in it. Both of these cameras do an excellent job. All right, so let's talk about tracking now and this removable screen. And when I first read about this feature, I honestly did not care about it at all. It sounded like a bit of a gimmick to me, but after actually using it and taking it traveling, it's become the standout feature of this camera for me, and actually one of the main reasons that I would choose it over the competition. It's incredibly useful being able to reframe shots from a distance without having to walk back and forth to the camera to check it. And for couples or solo travelers, it's just fantastic. It just makes it so much easier to set up creative shots or line shots up properly, get yourself in frame and capture moments that would otherwise be very difficult with a traditional camera setup. I can also see it being very useful for more advanced setups as well, whether that's mounting the camera that's just somewhere hard to reach, or rigging it to the outside of a vehicle, for example, for rolling shots. Now, remote camera control is obviously not a new idea, and it's something you've been able to do for years with the DJI Pocket with just a phone and an app. But honestly, I don't particularly like relying on phone apps for this kind of thing. So this is a prime example of when this is really useful for me, because I'm constantly doing portraits in video and wanting to record behind the scenes, but it's tough. I hate it when you have to use the apps because they often don't work. With this, I can easily reposition the frame, start and stop recording, and now I can even speak into this. So it just makes recording behind the scenes so much more convenient. Having a dedicated removable screen built into the system is simply quicker, it's just more convenient, and far less frustrating in my opinion. I found myself using it far more than I ever expected to, so credit to Insta360 for coming up with such a clever solution to this. And of course, one of the biggest advantages to a camera like this for solo creators is subject tracking, and thankfully, the Luna Ultra absolutely delivers here. The tracking performance is outstanding. It locks onto subjects quickly, it follows movement smoothly, and in my experience, it's been extremely reliable. So whether you're walking towards the camera, moving around in the frame, or filming yourself from a way far off distance, it just does a fantastic job of keeping you in the shot. So the tracking seems pretty good. And again, using the external screen remotely like this just makes tracking super convenient. This is on the 3x zoom right now, and I'm moving pretty quickly. I didn't even have to drag a box around me, it just detected me automatically. Let's see what it's like if I go really wide. So the screen's saying it's still detecting me. So try and walk out of frame, or see how far back I can walk actually. According to the screen again, it's still detecting me. It tracks so fast. Now I'm properly fully out of frame. Walk back in, see if it gets me. Yeah. Right, now I'm gonna walk out of frame and have Rachel walk in. I'm just curious if it'll figure out that it's not the same person. See if it gets you. No. That's awesome. Now I'll walk in and it gets me. That is crazy. That seems better than the Pocket to me, that's for sure. So as much as I have enjoyed using the Luna Ultra, there are definitely a couple of things that I'd like to see improved. And the first thing is a big one. It's when you're shooting directly into the sun. So you've probably already noticed this in some of the clips that I've shown, but the Luna Ultra really struggles in these situations. Not only do you get really large distracting lens flares, but the image can actually lose quite a lot of contrast and start to look very washed out. And yeah, whilst dynamic range is generally pretty impressive, there are times where there just simply isn't enough latitude to fully recover the image, particularly when you're shooting very heavily backlit subjects. And I found that the telephoto lens and sensor seems to suffer the worst as well. The second issue, and this could just be an early teething problem sort of thing with a new camera, is reliability when using the external screen. Generally, this camera has been actually rock solid for me, but once or twice I've experienced crashes when using the remote screen. On a couple of occasions, the camera just completely froze, and the only way that I could recover it was by reconnecting the screen and performing a kind of hard restart. And it's not something that's happened often. I think it's happened twice, but I think it's worth mentioning. And speaking of the removable screen, there's another feature I'd love Insta360 to add, and that is a way to lock the controls whilst you're using the screen remotely. So for example, you might frame a shot up from a distance and then put the screen in your pocket to hide it whilst you're recording. But the problem is, because the controls remain active at all times, it's very easy to accidentally move the joystick or press a button and stop recording, or ruin your framing without realizing it. Finally, and probably my biggest complaint, is that there's currently no option to use a view assist LUT when you're shooting in iLog. So that means both when you're recording and reviewing your footage, you're just looking at a really washed out flat log image. And it's already challenging enough judging exposure on such a small 2-inch screen, but having to do it without a preview LUT, it just makes things even harder. And this feels like an easy software fix, and it could actually already be fixed by the time this video's out, but it's really something that I think Insta360 needs to sort as soon as possible. Okay, so final thoughts on the Luna Ultra, and I have really liked using this camera. I've always liked the convenience of DJI's pocket cameras, but if I'm honest, I never really ended up using them as much as I wanted to, because the image quality just wasn't quite there for me really. With the Luna Ultra though, it finally feels like I'm getting something much closer to the image quality that I really like from something like the Canon PowerShot V1. But in a compact, easy to use gimbal camera. And my experience with Insta360 products has been fairly limited, so I owned the Go 3S and absolutely loved it, but the Luna Ultra has genuinely surprised me. The image quality is excellent for the size. The dynamic range is impressive, the internal microphones are fantastic, and the tracking is amongst the best that I've used. Honestly though, the feature that has completely won me over is definitely the removable screen. So when I first read about it, I really did not care. I just assumed it was a bit of a gimmick, but after actually using it, it's become one of my favorite features on any camera right now. I've already found myself setting up more creative shots when traveling and just filming more behind the scenes content and using tracking far more often than I normally would. And honestly, that is all because of this one single feature. Now, it is not perfect, and Insta360 still need to iron out some of the issues that I mentioned earlier. And I would in the future like to see features like 32-bit flow audio and better exposure tools added in future updates or to a future camera. Because the biggest issue with a camera like this is using such a small screen and trying to get the exposure right. It is one of the most challenging aspects of trying to capture great footage on a small camera like this. Of course, the elephant in the room is the DJI Pocket 4 Pro. So I really do want to get my hands on one and compare it directly to the Luna Ultra. But I have to admit, after using this camera, I'm not entirely sure I can live without that removable screen. And in all honesty, I only bought this camera with the intention to compare it to the DJI, and I just thought all along that without a doubt I would be keeping the DJI and probably selling this after the comparison, but now I'm confused. So I think I need to do that comparison for myself. So let me know what you think of the Luna Ultra, and let me know if you would want me to do a full comparison against the DJI Pocket 4 Pro. But anyway, that is it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.